Hi, I'm Alex Romaldi, and I'll be talking about the risks of genetic engineering. First question we have to ask ourselves is, what is genetic engineering? Genetic engineering is the direct manipulation of an organism's genome. So essentially, by taking foreign DNA and inserting it into a host genome, you can create essentially a new type of organism. And this is further done by isolating the genetic material of interest, generating a DNA sequence from it, and then you insert it into the host genome. So what are GM foods? GM foods are foods that have been modified to create certain traits such as quicker growth time, resistance to pathogens, to pests, herbicides, and even the production of extra nutrients and pharmaceuticals. So one example of genetic modification is in corn. Corn is one of the largest crops in the U.S. However, it's frequently attacked by pests such as the European corn borer, maize weevil, and corn earworm. And to the bottom of the picture, you see a picture of a European corn borer caterpillar. Alright, so BT. So BT is a soil-dwelling bacterium, and in certain strains it produces crystal proteins that are inherently toxic to certain insects. So scientists have discovered that if you were to take this insecticide bacteria and insert it in corn, the effect is that you get a crop that creates its own pesticides, and it'll kill anything that tries to eat any part of the plant, as you can see here. So what are the risks associated with genetic engineering? First of all, it is quite new, and it's crude technology, and it's very controversial. You're essentially manipulating nature, bypassing millions of years of evolutions between these two organisms, and you don't really know what's going to happen in the end. So one problem that genetic engineering has is on the environment. So furthermore, GM foods can target benign insect species, and the concern is that pesticide-producing proteins inside GM foods could essentially come into contact with non-crop damaging insects and kill them indiscriminately, because BT toxins, they don't target any specific insect species. They I don't know. We just don't have the technology yet to synthesize a gene from these BT toxins in order to selectively pick which organisms we want to kill. So the monarch, for example, is a victim of this genetic engineering because it feeds on milkweed. However, the milkweed patches are near corn, so BT corn with their BT toxins could come in contact with the monarchs and kill them. Another problem is the fact that insects over time could become immune to these pesticides. This has happened before with mosquitoes and their DDT, which was originally thought to to kill them, but over time they became immune to them. And the same idea is to be thought with GM crops, is that their pesticide proteins would eventually become ineffective towards these organisms because they would become immune to them. Another example would be cross-contamination, especially with weeds. So in addition to creating pesticides, some GM crops can produce herbicides, and if these GM crops were to transfer this herbicide gene to weeds, it'd make them invulnerable to certain pesticides, and that would have an effect on the environment, and especially in GM crops and organic crops. And another more major concern is the cross-contamination to non-GM crops, and pretty much the same thing, the fact that GM crops act just like organic crops. They can reproduce the same way, and if the pollen were to get into a non-GM crop, it could produce more GM products, and farmers would have no idea of knowing this. So next we have health hazards. One of them being allergy increase. So allergies pretty much occur when people come into direct contact with specific proteins in foods, and genetic modification would become even more of a problem because people would be eating non-allergenic foods but they might contain proteins that were transplanted from foods that cause allergies, so you'll see a potential increase in these proteins in foods that you thought were safe before. Next is antibiotic resistance. So in the process of creating these GM foods, the cells are given a antibiotic resistant gene, and this gene is essentially there just to mark cells that have been mixed with this foreign DNA. And the problem with this is that if GM foods were to be eaten at the same time a person were to, I don't know, take an antibiotic for a health problem, the gene would essentially disrupt the effect of the antibiotic, rendering it useless. And in addition to that, these antibiotic resistant genes could also transfer over to human and animal pathogens, thus making them invulnerable to antibiotics. And finally, we have organ damage. So a French study revealed that rats that were given GM foods died prematurely, and they also developed kidney and liver damage. Now, no humans were actually tested in this study, but it does show that not all is understood about genetic engineering and requires further testing to ensure their safety. And finally, we have economic issues. First being patents. So it's logical to see that any GM company would want to see a return on their investment, since they're spending millions of dollars in the research and the testing of these foods. So they'd want to put patents on their products to ensure the company has rights to produce them. And the problem with this is that it'll raise the price of GM seeds, making them harder to afford by farmers in third world countries. And if less people are able to buy them, of course these GM companies will make less money. And the problem with this in the economy is that the GM market has increased over the years, so we see more of genetic modification than organic produce. Another problem is market rejection. So it's been noticed that over a few years into the introduction of GM foods from the U.S. to countries like Europe and Asia, that consumers report that they didn't want to eat these genetically modified products, and the U.S. saw about a 71% loss of profit. So this can just this yet again has a problem with the economy, because these GM companies will be making very little money off their investment. And finally, GM contamination plays a part in the economy. Organic produce is significantly more expensive than GM food, and if GM crops were able to contaminate non-GM crops, then of course farmers would be producing GM crops, and that would result in a huge loss of profit for these farmers, and they could potentially lose their business. So in the end, what have we learned? Genetic engineering poses serious risks. It affects the environments by contaminating certain crops, killing off benign insects, affects public health, it can disrupt antibiotics if taken at the same time, potentially cause liver and kidney damage. It's just overall not beneficial to eat. And it just has problems with the economy, because due to market rejection and just the increasing cost of these seeds due to patents. So overall, in my opinion, I feel that they're just not a viable option in food production, and that other methods such as organic farming are far more effective.